Do small kids need socialization? Are moms enough for a child to develop properly? Have we been lied to about what small children need? Welcome to season 2 of What Should I Tell My Daughter? It's now called Psychobabble because I want to hit a broader range of cultural trends that contribute to our mental health crisis. Please share it with a friend, like and subscribe. It's really important. I've been really looking forward to today because this is an issue that is, or the issue that is the closest to my heart, namely daycares. And I'm honored to welcome today Erica Komisar. She has written 2 books, one called Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters, and in 2021, Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. And she's appeared on CBS, ABC, Fox, and she's a regular contributor for the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. And she's an incredible voice in this field. Thank you so much for doing this, connecting from New York City. Hi, Erica. Hi, Erica.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
So this is quite an unpopular topic, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. I mean, on the right, this is something the pro-life people are trying to not encourage that we speak up about. So of all the things that you could have written about, you have a private practice, there are enough patients out there. Why did you pick this?
Well, when you say this, do you mean specifically what very, very young children, what their irreducible needs are, or the daycare issue?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
The early childhood years and specifically the daycare issue. Yeah.
So I mean, basically, I felt like society was ignoring what was the most obvious thing, which is that we've moved in a way towards a trend of valuing the rights and needs and desires of adults, but not really the needs of children. And so I felt like it was time for a reset, that we really understand that the mental health crisis that we're seeing in children and adolescents is because we've become a very narcissistic society of valuing adult desires and needs and economic needs over the emotional and physical needs of children. So children have the irreducible needs that when they don't get those needs met, it often turns into where they often develop some of these mental health disorders, anxiety, depression, ADHD, and worse, personality disorders. Children require the presence of mothers in the first 3 years as much as possible, the physical and emotional presence of mothers or primary attachment figures, because mothers serve a biological function in those first 3 years, not just an emotional function. They help to do things like regulate emotions from moment to moment. They help to buffer stress from moment to moment. And they also help children to learn how to interact socially. So their presence in those first 3 years is critical to the safety and security and the emotional development and the right brain development of children. And I think we've basically ignored that because of the push for women to be in the workforce at such an early stage.
Okay.
And,
So you did, if I've understood that correctly, about 12 years of research for this book or more? The first book, Being There?
I would say more. At least 13 years of at least looking at all of the research. I'm not a researcher. I'm a clinician, but I'm a clinician who was very interested in neuroscience research and epigenetics research and attachment research. So in those 13 years where I was raising my own children and felt that writing the book that I wanted to write at that point, Being There, would interfere with my ability to be there for my children. So what I did is I read lots of research and I started to put together what then became Being There. Yeah.
Interesting. Could you take us through some of that research that's the basis of what you said in the beginning?
Well, I mean, attachment research basically says that if children are not, longitudinal attachment research says that if children are not securely attached after 12 months, and that secure attachment requires as much of their primary attachment figure's presence as possible, right? Children are born neurologically fragile. And so that means they require the presence of their primary attachment figure, usually their mother, to make them feel safe and secure in the world, right? They're not born resilient. They're not born like adults. And most adults are not resilient today, primarily because they weren't resilient when they were children and they weren't emotionally secure when they were children. So, but the attachment research tells us that after a year, if the child isn't securely attached, then in 20 years later, they're not securely attached. And that insecure attachment or those attachment disorders lead to things like anxiety, depression, and borderline personality disorder.
Right.
So we have that research. We also have, I mean, there's a ton of research. I don't know which piece of research you want, but there's, I mean, I would say read Being There and you'll see all of the research. You know, another critical piece of research is Michael Meany's research about generational expression, that he did research that was critical to the writing of this book, which was critical to the writing of the first book, Being There, which is that when mothers lick and groom their young, he did animal research. When mothers lick and groom their young, they pass down generationally the ability to lick and groom their young. When mothers don't lick and groom their young, they don't pass that down generationally. But also the mothers who licked and groomed their young, which is the equivalent of physical and emotional presence. Basically, mothers lick and groom their young in the animal kingdom, and we're nothing more than mammals, really. They lick and groom their young as a way to regulate their emotions, as a way to regulate their stress levels. And what his research showed is that the mothers who licked and groomed their young produced more resilient young. Those young were more resilient to stress. And so what we know is that if we want our children to become resilient to stress, then we have to be there physically and emotionally to protect them from stress in those first 3 years as much as possible, to buffer them, and also to bring their emotions to what we call homeostasis. So, you know, a mother's role, every time a mother soothes the baby in distress, she's keeping that baby's emotions from going too high or too low. It's called emotional regulation. And so that's very important for the right brain, because we're not supposed to turn on the stress regulating parts of our brain with great intensity until after a year. And so those are just I mean, there's so much research.
That was
I mean,
when you said neurologically fragile. That's what you mean, that
very neurologically fragile. So, it's very hard for me as a psychoanalyst, as a social worker, as a clinician, as a mother, for me to see how mothers can deny the emotional and neurological fragility of their children, how they project onto them something that's not there yet. It's very hard for me because I see infants for what they are, which is incredibly neurologically fragile and emotionally and physically fragile. But the way that society is structured, mothers go into schizoid states where they disconnect from their baby's fragility almost after they're born, so they can leave them quickly. And that's doing a lot of damage.
Yeah, I think that we're told that the kids are malleable. They are, you know, it's all socially constructed, and they're supposed to be as independent. Yeah, exactly. I was just saying, these are the things that I hear.
Just know, these are all myths. Listen, these are economic myths. These are myths that are promoted by the society. If you live, where do you live?
Now in Zurich. But I grew up in Norway. I lived in Norway until adulthood, so.
Okay, so Norway is one of those countries, it's more socialist, where the idea was we have to get more people into the workforce because that's what sustains this economic level for us. And so that's an economic paradigm. That's not an emotional, neurological paradigm for children. That is an economic paradigm. So if we're talking, and what really bothers me, if I'm going to say, is when economists talk about this topic.
Okay, what do
Because
they
they
say?
don't know what they're talking about from the perspective of children's mental and emotional health. They know what they're talking about from society's economic health. But having said that, I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not and give advice about the economy. But I know from America, where I live, that when we produce incredibly emotionally and neurologically fragile children, they grow into dysfunctional, mentally ill adults who then are not functional in the economy long term. So, in the long term, in the short term, it's better for the economy to have as many women in the workforce as possible. In the long term, it is not good for the economy to have a bunch of mentally ill children that grow into mentally ill adults who then have to be cared for by the socialist state.
Yeah. And those numbers are really, they're staggering. It's unbelievable.
So I wish economists wouldn't talk about this topic. That's what I wish.
So let's talk a bit about what we're seeing in the clinic. So when I was working, and I quit my job 5 years ago, and then it struck me how many personality disorders I had in front of me. And I remember I asked my chief at the time. He had 40 years of experience. So I said, the books, they say that these cluster B disorders, so emotionally unstable, impulsive, borderline, I'm just going to say it like that because here we follow ICD-10 and in the US DSM, where it's cluster B. But we can say, okay, they're all emotionally unstable. He said they seem to be more prevalent than they are in my textbook. I told him, he said, yeah, like they're coming more and more. Can you say something about that? Did you find anything?
So yes. So attachment disorders come in different varieties, right? They come in different forms. Secure attachment is the ideal. And then if you're not securely attached, because your mother was either physically or emotionally unavailable or both, you end up with one of a variety of disorders. You either end up with an avoidant attachment disorder, which is looks like this. You come home from work or from wherever you've been, and your child turns away from you, looks away, reaches for other people, develops indiscriminate attachment to others. Doesn't want to have anything to do with you. That's called an avoidant attachment disorder, which is most likely correlated in the future with depression and the inability to form intimate relationships with others in the future. Avoidant attachment disorder is you come home and your baby clings to you for dear life because history tells them that you're going to keep leaving them and leaving them. Or if you're with them physically, but you're not emotionally available, they cling to you like for life itself. And that's called an ambivalent attachment disorder, which is most correlated with anxiety in the future. But the most difficult to treat, and the one that we're most worried about, is the rise in borderline personality disorders as a result of disorganized attachment disorders. So these babies have no, these babies have no strategy. So say that avoidant attachment disorder and ambivalent attachment disorder are strategies. They're defensive strategies that children use, not consciously, but unconsciously. They don't get to pick them. It comes up in them that they have a strategy to deal with their mother's unavailability. Okay. Either because she's not there, or because she's distracted, because she's depressed, because she's resentful, because she has anxiety and depression herself. So all of those things would indicate that baby has to develop a strategy to cope with life, right? A disorganized attachment disorder, there's no strategy. That's a baby without a strategy. So what they do instead is cycle through strategies. They'll turn away, then they'll cling, then they'll slap their mother, then they'll turn away, then they'll cling, then they'll... So it's like seeking a strategy but not finding one. And that's correlated most with borderline personality disorders. And we're seeing a lot of borderline personality disorders in young adults, because that's what we see with self-harming behavior, with suicidal ideation. We're seeing this huge rise of personality disorders.
Because they cannot regulate their emotions. They're completely
They can't regulate their emotions. They can't cope with There's no coping. They're sensitive. They're more sensitive babies, and they can't cope with their mother's neglect. And let's call a spade a spade. When you have a schizoid response to mothering, when you can just shut down, which is what it requires to leave a baby in daycare at 6 weeks or leave a baby at 3 months, you have to shut down your maternal preoccupation.
Right.
Turn it off like a light switch. When you do that, your baby is all but lost. And so they have to develop a strategy to cope with that loss. And some babies develop a strategy. And mind you, those strategies don't necessarily hold a whole lifetime. Remember, we say in my field that repression is a wonderful defense if it lasts a lifetime. So, those babies develop defenses. They may last them quite a long time, but they usually don't last a lifetime. So those children end up requiring therapy at some point for depression, for anxiety. But the most difficult, I think, is obviously when you develop a borderline or narcissistic personality disorder. Those are the hardest to treat.
Right. So this schizoid way of mothering that you shut off and you go, I think that's made a bit easier about by the lies that women have been told, because they're not doing this out of malice. I think that and I've talked to a lot of working moms, and they really do believe that they're not enough. And that's also what I heard when I quit my job, and people are still bothering me about I have to go back to work very forcefully. They want me to go back to work. And and they told me, your child is better off. It needs socialization. It needs.
Oh dear,
So
that's so disturbing for me. So I work a lot in Sweden.
Oh, really?
I go to Sweden quick, and I work a lot in Sweden. It's not so dissimilar to where you're from, in that is the myth that they tell women to get them into the workforce. So if I need to get you into the workforce, I need to tell as many lies to you as possible to get you to go into the workforce. And what they're telling women is just pure bullshit. It is absolute myth. Children do something called parallel playing in the first 3 years. They do not require the presence of another child in the first 3 years. They require the presence of their primary attachment figure to provide them with a sense of security so they can develop in a normal developmental line, so they can take risks, so they can explore well within the presence of their mother. So the idea is that when your mother is physically and emotionally present, you can take more risks. You can toddle off and play on the monkey bars in the playground. You can play with a toy that you might not. You can try to walk and run away and hide, but she's there to provide you. So if you need to come back and get a snuggle and be reassured. So it is an absolute myth that children need to be socialized under the age of 3. They do not. Women do. Mothers need socialization. Mothers need other mothers. We never raise children in isolation. We always raise children in extended family communities. Mothers need other mothers. So if we're talking socialization, it isn't the babies who need socialization. It's
that's
the mothers.
so true. Yeah.
But mothers don't need to go out to work to be socialized. They just need other mothers.
Yeah.
Being active all the time and incorporating that into your everyday life is easier said than done. For me, it really helped when I found Pitch Fitness Center, a premium wellness gym. It's not just your run-of-the-mill fitness center with white walls and vinyl floor, smells like a school gym. This place really gives you that hotel spa feeling. And the best thing as a mom is that it has this kids club, which is amazing. My kids really like to go there. We go every day, even on Sundays. It's so good that even when I'm too lazy to work out, my kids force me to go anyway, and then I go to the wellness area. They even have a steam bath, a biosauna, a Finnish sauna, and a quiet room where you can lie down. I usually fall asleep a little bit, and afterwards I feel so pampered, and my kids have had the time of their lives. So please go and check it out. The link is in the description, and you can give them a promo code. It's What Should I Tell My Daughter, and you'll get a discount.
But what is the difference between when we have one of these play dates and the kids are in a daycare? What happens there neurologically?
So what ends up happening when children are in daycare is that they, as I said, they have to develop strategies, usually neurotic or pathological strategies to cope with the loss and the abandonment. So they're not resilient. In fact, I would say to increase parents, and particularly mothers' empathy for their children, children are quite fearful. Even the most brave child is still quite fearful in the first 3 years. In other words, being there in the first 3 years, what does it do? It lays down the foundation of, the whole word security is a word that we just think of as a clinical term, but actually just think about what that word means. It makes them feel that they are internally secure in the world, no matter what their environment is outside, right? And the only way they develop that is if you're present for them as much as possible in those first 3 years. So you put them into daycare, and the earlier you put them into daycare, the more fragile they are. You are basically forcing them to develop pathological defensive coping strategies, which will catch up to them and catch up to you. Because the way I say it to parents is this: you're only as happy as your least happy child. When you raise children that end up developing stress disorders like ADHD, which is not in and of itself a disorder, it is a reaction to a maladaptive reaction to stress. It is that you have exposed your child, overexposed your child to stress, and their stress regulating system has turned on, their amygdala. The stress regulating system has been turned on too early and now is in a hypervigilant state, so it can't shut down. So they either develop hyperactivity, they develop early signs of aggression, and behavioral disorders. So what the research shows is that children who are put in daycare at too young an age end up developing behavioral issues and early signs of aggression when they get to their school years. And so school years meaning at 3. So in America, we say anything under the age of 3 is not school. It's daycare. Preschool in America used to be 3 to 5. Kindergarten was 5 to 6, and then you started first grade, second grade, right? But anything under the age of 3 was daycare. Now, because of the supply and demand in America, we call 14 months olds being put into school. We followed your model, but it's not school, it's daycare. Anything under 3 is daycare.
In Norway, they just bulk everything together. So it's until your school age at 6, it's all, they separate small kids and larger kids, but it's all just it's culturally mandatory from 12 months.
I know.
And even if the mother isn't working, part-time, the kids, they go to the daycare. But it's very interesting what you say about ADHD, because this is also, I've been looking for people who would say something about ADHD and they refuse. It's also this very inflamed topic, and we've had in Norway, the rate has increased by 241% since 2000. And no one's really sort of asking out. Their answer is this: no, we're just better at diagnosing, and people feel more comfortable coming and saying that they have psychological issues, which is true. But we wouldn't. This rate is insane.
So there is a wonderful organization in Sweden that I will connect you with, that I think is doing wonderful work in Sweden to bring attention to the things that you're describing in Sweden, and also is part of a large organization worldwide that has many of the countries in Northern Europe, organizations that get together that are trying to educate mothers on this topic, because the idea is, we fight a lot in this world on misinformation. And narratives that are untruthful. And some of those narratives that are untruthful are even promoted by the government, right? We know that the Swedish government, the Norwegian government, the Danish government, even the American government, the ideas, they promote the ideas that women getting into the workforce earlier is better for society. Now, it is better economically for those families potentially, and maybe for society economically, but it is disastrous to children emotionally and neurologically. And so what you're doing is you're valuing economics over a child's mental health. And that backfires in the long run. And yes, I know Norway is very much like Sweden. They want as many, they say for our society economically to work, we want as many adults in the workforce as possible. But it backfires and it is backfiring now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Another thing that's interesting about the Scandinavian countries is that they try very much to say that mom and dad's the same. That they're interchangeable.
Gender neutrality.
Exactly. What are your thoughts on that? They even now split.
Another myth. It's another myth, and it's a myth that the idea that mothers and fathers are exactly the same is a myth. Mothers and fathers are different based on their hormones and how those hormones affect behavior. Women and men are not the same. Biologically, we have different nurturing behaviors related to a different set of hormones that we produce in great quantities. Women produce something called oxytocin when they're pregnant, when they give birth, when they breastfeed, and when they nurture their child. They produce a lot of oxytocin. Oxytocin is what we call the love hormone. It's a neurotransmitter that basically helps us to bond and attach to our babies and also to tune in. So in mothers, lots of oxytocin makes them very vigilant to distress, makes them very attuned to children's distress in terms of regulating those children's emotions biologically, right? We know that oxytocin helps us to see when our child is in distress, to soothe them and get them back to homeostasis. Fathers, when they care for their children and stay home with their children, they produce some oxytocin. It comes from a different part of the brain, and it makes them more playfully stimulating of babies, more tactile, playful stimulation of babies, more tickling, more throwing the baby up in the air, more exploration and risk-taking behaviors. That's a different response to the same hormone. Also, fathers produce a hormone called vasopressin in greater quantities than women do. That's what we call the protective aggressive hormone. So there was research in England done, in the UK done, where mothers and fathers were lying in bed. When the baby cried, the fathers slept through the cries and the mothers woke immediately to the distress of the babies. The father slept through. And when there was rustling of leaves outside the window, the fathers woke up, but the mothers slept through.
Interesting.
So
That is so interesting.
Fathers were attuned to the predatorial threats outside, whereas the mothers slept through because they said the fathers didn't do that.
Because I cannot have coffee with other women without them complaining about their husbands not waking up to the baby.
Right. That's it. But they're not supposed to wake up.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do is trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And it offends me when the Swedish government tries to split what is a decent period of maternity leave into paternity and maternity leave equally taken or lost. And it offends me. It also offends me that after 14 months, they force women into the workforce. These are children who've never had a babysitter, who've been with their mothers full time, many of them who are attached. Now these babies are thrown into 10 hours of daycare and they are traumatized. And that trauma then causes depression, anxiety, behavioral issues, aggression. So, you know, in a way, it's like giving with one hand and then taking away with the other. So we don't give anything in America. We suck the most. But you suck too. You suck too in Northern Europe because you give with one hand and then traumatize these children.
And you know what happened now last year? Those really interesting statistics, speaking of this, because they took away from the mother maternity leave, the famous 1-year maternity leave in Scandinavia, split it so the father has to take all those
has to take it, even if he doesn't want to.
And then what happened?
Even if he doesn't want to.
Last year, 48% of new mothers, they took unpaid leave to be with their babies.
That's it. I mean, that's what we have to do in America, and it's absolutely ridiculous. I fight it in America. I talk to policymakers, and you know, I say it's a world. It's not just in America. It's where you are too. It is a world that does not like children. We do not like children. We do not respect children's needs. We do not like children or childhood. Right? And that's what it's about. We resent the dependency. of
Where do you
children.
think that comes from?
Governments resent the dependency of children. Mothers and fathers now resent the dependency of children. That's what I treat. That's what my practice is about. I treat parents who have lost their ability to feel empathy for their children, and they want so badly to connect with their children, but something has been cut in them. Something has been, it's like a chip in their brain has been removed, and they're trying to get it back. And the truth is, it hasn't been removed. It's still there. It needs to be re-enlivened. But the idea that we basically have lost we resent children, we resent childhood, we resent the dependency of childhood, and we've become a world that's very narcissistically adult focused.
Do you have any idea where those original myths came from, the socialization, all these things that we still believe?
It's economic. It is purely economic. It started that way. Now it's become more damaging than that. But at some point, it was purely economic. It was those myths were promoted in Sweden, in Norway, in Denmark. Not so much in Finland, but now in Finland too. I mean, in Finland, they used to have the best policies. Now it's Hungary that has the best policies. Finland used to have pretty decent policies of allowing for choice, family choice. So families could choose. They still do, but there's more pressure in Finland now to use daycare. But Finland used to say, you have a choice. You can either take the $15,000 and use it about that, whatever, and use it to care for your own children, or give it to your grandmother to care for your own children, or you can use the daycare system. I mean, but now they're pushing women, like in Sweden. And all of these countries had an economic agenda. So we really have to be careful about what we believe today. I mean, I think that you don't just take things at surface value and say that others know best for you and your family. You know what's best. If you feel a pull towards your child and you don't want to leave your child, then I'm going to say you do everything in your power not to, even if it means making compromises financially in those years, even if it means selling a car, moving into a cheaper home, moving in with your parents while you're raising children, not taking vacations, not going out to eat as much. You think about the sacrifices you must make when you're raising young children, but I guarantee you those sacrifices will pay in spades. They will be the best investment you have ever made in your life.
So I have a question from a listener, a young mom with 2 children, and she asked what she can do because she feels such guilt for having worked when the first child was little. Now the child's in school, but that guilt, she wants to make up for that damage she did to that attachment, which is now apparent to her. Do you have any advice?
Well, I hate to give clinical advice over a podcast or any other remote way. I would say go and see somebody clinically and talk about it. But my immediate reaction is you can repair quite a bit of the damage done. But it means you have to change your behavior with that child. It means you can't keep going on the same. And if she's asking, then she's saying, what can I do? And so she is willing to make behavioral changes. And what it means is having a different attitude about that child. So when we leave our children very young, when we go into that schizoid state as mothers, we are projecting onto those children that they are more capable, more independent, more resilient than they actually are. So I don't know how old her child is. I don't have enough detail.
No, of course
but what
not.
I would
Of course
say,
not.
you go back and you make sure to drop your child off at school in the morning. You be there for the transitions. You make sure to pick your child up at school after they're finished. You spend the afternoon with your child, making them cookies, going to the park, being with them. You put them to sleep at night. You make sure that you're there when they need you, when they're in distress.
Right. So
and you don't impose on them.
So after 3, you can repair attachment.
You can repair. So my second book is about the second critical window of development, which is 9 to 25, but you don't have to wait till 9 to repair it. You can try to repair it at any point in that journey. And I think, yes, it may not be perfect. You may not be able to repair everything, but even talking to your child about how sad you are that you weren't there when he was really little, and you want to be there now, and you understand that you weren't always there when he needed you, and you're so sad about that, and you feel sad for him, and you're sad too. Those little things that you can do to take responsibility for your role and try to change that dynamic with your child.
So really just being there for them. Yeah. And
physically and emotionally. Yeah.
Right.
There is no replacement for it, and there's no magic pill for it. It really is being there.
How can you notice in a school-aged child if their attachment is disturbed?
Well, if you ask a teacher to tell you which children in the classroom have been in daycare, they can tell you every time.
Oh, really?
You know, America, you ask teachers, they'll tell you. They either show early signs of aggression towards other children, they show signs of distractibility, they show signs of having behavioral issues of some kind. And so all of these things, so the distractibility is the flight part of fight or flight. The aggression is the fight part of fight or flight. Right? So basically what you're seeing in classrooms is the fight or flight response.
Right. And some of these kids, they really cannot sit still. I've seen videos of them. These ADHD kids.
That's flight. That's flight. That is flight. That's what ADHD is. Nothing more than the flight part of a stress reaction. And it's the flight part. It's not a disorder. It's that they've been either you've exposed them to, or they've been exposed to too much stress too early for their brains to be capable of coping with it.
Are there others who are also this vocal about ADHD not being a disorder? Because it's a very taboo that I could speak to.
Absolutely. I just wrote a chapter for a book on ADHD, which talks about it not being a disorder. So yes, there's a lot, if you look, there's a lot of pushback. There's even a push to take the disorder out of ADHD.
Oh, really?
So the D is disorder. So there's a push to take that D off, because it's not a disorder. It is not a brain disorder that you're born with. It is not something that is irreparable and is only treatable with medication. But it means that this is a child who has been exposed to too much stress, who's never developed proper stress responses. And again, without going into more detail, some of it is repairable. Some of it is repairable. Maybe not all of it, but some of it is repairable. And with some young people, all of it can be repairable if you catch it early enough. Right? Do not medicate away the symptoms. The way I'll describe this to you is, unless a child is severely, severely distractible, meaning they wander in the classroom, where you're going to medicate them while they're in therapy and then use the medication as a bridge to get them off of the medication. Medication just silences pain. It doesn't heal or cure that brain. So, the issue is that it's like taking aspirin for the headaches from a brain tumor. If I were to say to you, here, let me just keep giving you Advil or ibuprofen. I don't know what they call it in Switzerland. If I said, take paracetamol for a headache related to a brain tumor. Do you think that's a very wise way of going about it? No, you would say, I got to get to a doctor. I got to deal with the brain tumor underlying the headaches, not just silence. So I may take some medication to help me with the headaches while I'm getting help with the real cause of the headaches. But you don't just medicate away symptoms. The problem is that society is still so very fixed on symptom relief and quick fixes to symptoms rather than really dealing with causes. And it's sort of fighting the tide of a societal movement against dealing with origins.
Yeah, they're really pushing this, that it's genetic. And I had adults come into my office with filled out forms from the internet and said, my son just got diagnosed with ADHD, so I must have it too, and sort of put them on my desk, these questionnaires. So I was like, what am I supposed to do with this?
So, I would say, when you hear that the entire world, that 50% of the population has a disorder, I think we now know that maybe it's not a disorder, maybe that we're labeling something a disorder that is a normal reaction to stress. And so, so I think we're at a point, we're getting to a critical point where it's almost ridiculous to call it a disorder. That would mean that every child has the disorder. And that's just, we know that that's not possible. Yeah.
That's amazing.
This episode is also sponsored by Violet Nails, where I've been going to for years. It has a bunch of things from eyebrows and massages, mani-pedis, and the result is always so smooth and elegant. And the best thing, I think, is that the treatment never lasts longer than planned, which is important when you have places to go and kids and all of that. You can sit in a massage chair while you get your treatment and listen to music. It's a really good time out. So go to the link below and check it out.
Okay. I mean, thank you so much. What's next for you? Where can we find you?
So you can find me. My website is www.komisar.com. It has all of my articles and links to my books that you can buy, and everything that I write about and talk about is as well as a link to how you connect with me if you want to be treated by me. So that's the best way to reach me. And I'm working on a third book now about divorce and children going through divorce. So that's my next book, but it won't be out for quite some time.
Okay. So this has been really great, and I hope listeners order your book. Really recommend it, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for listening to Psychobabble. Please share it with a friend, like and subscribe. It's really important.